Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media.
I shot her, the man said, but didn't kill her. It was supposed to be a travel day. Colonel William Butts, former U.S. Army officer and seasoned adventurer, was preparing to ride out from his Sierra Foothill ranch, beginning a journey eastward from California to settle legal matters back home. His bags were packed, his horse was saddled, but then, just after dawn, a ranch hand came running. She was the grizzly that had been raiding livestock for weeks, a cunning, powerful old sow, known to leave half-eaten calves in her wake and disappear into the canyons. Butts should have left. He had business to attend to, but he couldn't resist. He strapped on his long knife, slung his Winchester Model 1890 or 90 gun, mounted his favorite horse, and rode out toward the ravine where the wounded bear had last been seen. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. In the early days of California statehood, the Sierra Nevada foothills were wild, largely untamed, and crawling with some of the largest and most aggressive grizzly bears on the continent. The terrain stretched across rugged canyons, rocky outcrops, and oak-dotted grasslands that rolled down toward the Central Valley. It was here, in what is now believed to be the foothills of Mariposa, Tuolumne, or Merced County, that Colonel William Butts had established his ranch. The area was rich in wildlife. Black-tailed deer, tule elk, and jackrabbits roamed the grasslands. Predators included mountain lions and coyotes, but none stirred as much dread or admiration as the California grizzly bear. Towering above their inland cousins, these bears sometimes exceeded 1,200 pounds and were infamous for their short tempers. The land was dotted with gray pines, blue oaks, and interior live oaks, with thickets of poison oak, wild grape, and California blackberry forming ideal bear cover along creek beds. According to grizzly historian Tracy I. Storer, the region held some of the highest concentrations of grizzlies anywhere in North America during the mid-19th century. As ranches sprang up along the gold rush routes, bear encounters became frequent and often fatal. Colonel William Bill Butts was a veteran of the U.S. Army with combat experience in Mexico and the Great Plains. He was described as a quiet, medium-built man with a strong sense of adventure and a reputation for courting danger. After leaving military life, Butts settled in California, where he became a lawyer, a rancher, and by reputation one of the state's most determined grizzly hunters. As a grizzly hunter, Butts packed a 90 gun, formerly known as a Winchester Model 1890. It was a lever-action rifle that held black powder-loaded cartridges in a tube, allowing hunters to fire rapidly and repeatedly. It was known for its accuracy and reliability and featured an octagonal barrel. At the time, it was one of the frontiersman's best friends. The land here was as wild and unforgiving as any battlefield. Chaparral clung to the hillsides. Poison oak curled around boulders. The ravine cut deep, a gash of rock and brush and shadow. They reached the lip of the gorge. Butts dismounted, crept to the edge, and peered down into the thicket. And the earth gave way. In an instant the colonel tumbled forward, rolling and crashing down the ravine wall. He landed hard at the bottom, stunned and gasping, at the very edge of the grizzly's hiding place. The bear was already moving. She came out of the brush like an avalanche, a blur of fur and fury. She hit him once, then again, shaking him like a rag doll. Butts scrambled to his feet, clawed his way up the steep slope, bleeding and dazed. Behind him the bear climbed too, digging in with her claws, her breath hot on his back. They reached the top together. Butts turned to fire. The bear lunged. Her jaws clamped around the barrel of his rifle and bit down so hard that she bent it like a leaden rod. Whether the gun jammed or simply never fired is lost to time. Either way, he swung it like a club and struck her across the skull. She retaliated by dragging him back, sinking her teeth into his leg, and toppling them both over the edge again. They tumbled down together, a flurry of claws, fists, and earth. At the bottom, the fight began again. She mauled him savagely, tore his scalp, and chewed at his face. He slashed with his knife, blinding her in one eye. She backed away, then turned and came again. Over and over, the earth was soaked with blood. After half an hour of man-on-bear battle, it finally ended. The knife wounds inflicted by Butts took their toll on the sow, and she began to tire. Then she fell. He'd stabbed her enough times and deep enough to end it. She collapsed beside him, dead at last. Butts wasn't far behind, but somehow survived. He lost part of his scalp and an ear. One side of his face was left permanently paralyzed, and he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. The attack was so severe that it delayed his trip east, but it cemented his reputation in frontier lore. The bear, a large female grizzly, was killed in the fight. She acted defensively after being wounded and having Butts tumble toward her hiding spot. No animal carcasses were reported nearby, and the presence of cubs was not observed. Speaking of cubs, our Cub Tier membership on Patreon, linked below, will give you ad-free early access to photos, notes, and episodes. And the $3 per month goes a long way in helping me continue to produce educational and entertaining content like this. Colonel Butts' battle with the grizzly became the stuff of California legend. The Central Valley was thick with ravines, livestock ranches, and California's most aggressive grizzlies, which were common in conflicts during the 1850s. Grizzlies were numerous, territorial, and fearless, especially when wounded. The California subspecies was known for its massive size and pugnacious behavior. Butts had tracked a bear that had already been shot and likely retreated to die or to fight. What followed was one of the bloodiest one-on-one battles between man and bear ever recorded. In the 1800s, California hosted an estimated grizzly bear population of 10,000 bears or more. They ranged in size from 600 to 1,200 pounds. The last grizzly was killed in Tulare County in 1922. Today, the California grizzly is extinct in the state, but may still exist in the mountains of Mexico, according to unverified sightings. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. What made Colonel Butts willing to pursue a wounded grizzly into such dangerous terrain, and was that bravery or recklessness? With such a reliable weapon, why didn't Butts lay up and wait for the grizzly? And did Colonel Butts ever truly recover, or did he live every day after, with that bear still beside him in memory? I will gladly read and reply to your thoughts, so post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
The dogs knew before he did. It was just after midnight on June 3rd, 2025, and somewhere between the towns of Condon and Seeley Lake, a landowner, whom we'll refer to as Jim, awoke to the furious barking of his dogs and a restless noise rising from his livestock pens. This was no ordinary stir. Something was out there, something big enough to disturb every animal on the property. Jim stepped outside, the cool night air wrapping around him like a wet sheet. A flashlight in one hand, a firearm in the other, he scanned the darkness. Montana nights were no stranger to wild visitors, especially here. Bears roamed freely, and everyone who lived in these parts knew it. Jim had read the stories. Just a couple of years earlier, a bear had wandered the streets of Kalispell in broad daylight, spotted near an elementary school. Wildlife officers had tracked it and relocated it, but it wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last. And there was that grim story from back in 2015, when an elderly woman in Kalispell was caught in her home by a bear she'd been feeding. That one had never been caught. In Montana, bears weren't just in the wild anymore. They were brushing the edges of towns, weaving through fences, drawn closer each year, and now one was here. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. This incident unfolded in Montana's Swan Valley, a corridor of deep forest and wild habitat that bridges the remote Bob Marshall wilderness with the more populated Flathead and Missoula valleys. The area around the town of Seeley Lake is known for its dense forests, alpine meadows, and a mix of vegetation such as subalpine fir, Douglas fir, and lodgepole pine. Thimbleberry, red osier dogwood, and serviceberry bushes line the slopes, providing seasonal forage. Large plant-eating mammals like mule deer, elk, and moose are common throughout the Swan Valley, while wolves, black bears, mountain lions, and grizzly bears are the area's top predators. Grizzly populations in western Montana are both denser and more widespread than they were even a decade ago. This expansion brings bears into closer proximity with livestock, pets, and rural homes, especially in the early summer when natural food sources may still be scarce. As Jim settled in to rest for the evening, well-deserved peace washed over him. He'd performed his chores and tasks, expending energy that might otherwise keep his eyes open with common life concerns. His farm dogs were also settling down as they embraced the cool, dark evening for a little shut-eye themselves. Jim's sleep was interrupted a few hours into the night. He could hear his dogs barking and growling, as well as his livestock raising a ruckus. This didn't happen often, but sometimes a coyote or a neighbor dog might wander through, winding everyone up. He decided he would go investigate, just to be sure it wasn't anything serious. Without thinking too much about it, Jim slipped on his shoes and grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen counter he'd put there for precisely this reason. Knowing he was in bear country, Jim also grabbed his trusty firearm. Even if he didn't use it to defend his own life or the lives of his animals, the gun was handy for firing warning shots to scare away anything that came near. As Jim slipped out the door and into the cool evening air, the moment came fast. As the flashlight beam revealed whatever it landed on, a pair of yellow glowing dots flickered in the light's edge. Jim immediately knew by the height and positioning of the eyes this was no neighbor dog or coyote. He held his firearm steady as he positioned the flashlight beam to focus on the grizzly. Now, for those of you wondering what brought the bear to Jim's farm, a brief discussion on attractants may help you understand the situation better. One of the most common attractants that can be found on a farm is the livestock feed. Anything containing grain or pelletized mixtures of it can be picked up on the breeze by the bear's sensitive nose from miles away. It is likely Jim's farm dogs were fed outside, so that may be a contributing factor in it too. Finally, just about everything a human does gives off an interesting scent to bears, including urine and feces, which contain high amounts of waste sodium, desired by bears. Living in the country also presents a difficulty in the disposal of trash. Combined, these attractants are difficult to control at times, and bears' noses are more than ready to point them toward a promising scent. As soon as the beam of light illuminated the grizzly's location, Jim let out a holler, trying to run it off. This is a tactic that usually gets any animal moving on that knows it shouldn't be so close to people, but this grizzly had a much more terrifying reaction. As Jim aimed his gun toward the bear, it spun to face him, honing in on the source of light and the location of his voice. This allowed the man to fire at the bear once it was clear the predator had no intention of stopping. The bear collapsed in the grass, its momentum halted before it could defend itself. Keeping the beam focused on the grizzly bear's carcass, Jim waited and watched for movement. He knew how hard it could be to kill a grizzly, and he wasn't about to give it a chance to turn him into a statistic. When dawn broke, the carcass of a grizzly bear lay on the property, and Jim called authorities so they could initiate an investigation. Wildlife officials arrived, confirmed the species of the bear, and classified the shooting as a defense-of-life incident. At first glance, they recognized the bear as a healthy male, but until the results of the necropsy are released, it isn't known if it was diseased or starving. They'd seen this kind of encounter before, more frequently now. Bear populations were growing, not just in number, but in range. Grizzlies that once kept to the high country now followed rivers and ridgelines into places where people lived. Sometimes they came for garbage, sometimes for chickens or compost, and sometimes, as in this case, for reasons no one could quite explain. Following the encounter, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks reiterated its Be Bear Aware safety guidelines in public notices, which include securing trash, removing bird feeders, and using electric fencing for livestock and compost. Officials emphasized the importance of bear spray and early detection strategies, especially in places where dogs or livestock may be vulnerable to conflict. As for the motives of the grizzly, it is clear that it was intent on raiding the feed or livestock of Jim's land. There was no mention of an animal carcass cached nearby, and it wasn't protecting cubs, given it was a male. Speaking of cubs, our Cub Tier membership on Patreon, linked below, will give you ad-free early access to photos, notes, and episodes. And the $3 per month goes a long way in helping me continue to produce educational and entertaining content like this. Montana is host to several grizzly recovery zones, where approximately 1,000 grizzlies roam. This was the 6th documented grizzly bear to meet its end this year, including 2 of those incidents being a case of defensive life. Reports of incidents and sightings are increasing along the Montana-Idaho border, particularly in the Flathead Valley of Montana. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. What can landowners do to discourage bears from approaching their property, especially when livestock or dogs are present? Should bear spray be required equipment for anyone living in Montana's rural valleys? Do increasing defensive life shootings reflect a rising danger or a need for more widespread public education? I will gladly read and reply to your thoughts, so post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. The morning mist hung low over the creek like a mystery on a thoughtful mind. Lyndon Hooper, aged 51, stood quietly on the muddy bank, casting a silver spinner into the slow current. The forest behind him was still, silent, save for the occasional warble of a songbird and the snap of twigs beneath his boots. It was Labor Day weekend in 1959, and he and his companions had come to the remote stretch of water to fish near Coal Branch, to escape and perhaps to be alone in the kind of solitude that only wilderness could offer. Only his fishing companions knew where he was. That was how Lyndon preferred it. He'd hiked the last mile to the stream with his rod, creel, and gear slung over one shoulder. No firearms, no dog, no companion. Just him, the babbling creek, and the fish. He'd likely cleaned a few trout that morning and packed them carefully in his creel, their scent strong in twisting air currents. But something else had caught that scent. Welcome back to scary bear attacks. In 1959, many places were growing increasingly urbanized in the post-war era. Remote wilderness areas remained untouched and teeming with wildlife. The area around Coal Branch featured a mix of black and white spruce, fir and pine, as well as aspen trees, with understories of currant, buffalo berry, and low bush cranberry bushes. Fishing spots during that era were often in dense terrain, accessible only by foot or boat, and offered both bounty and danger. There are plenty of prey animals here, including moose, woodland caribou, bison, and mule, as well as white-tailed deer, roaming the forests and meadows. Bighorn sheep and mountain goats stay high on the peaks. Predators include wolves, lynx, and most significantly, black bears and the occasional inland grizzly. While bear attacks were rare, they were not unheard of, particularly when human activity involved food sources like fish. On the morning of Sunday, September 6th, after a brief discussion, Hooper and his friends decided where each would spend their day and departed. Hooper knew just where he wanted to go, and the rolling forested trail made for an easy and peaceful hike. It is unclear how long Hooper fished, and uncertainty surrounds his success, but one thing is clear, he was not alone on the creek that day. He was being observed and likely stalked by a black bear, cleverly concealed in the brush along the bank. He was set to reconnect with his fishing buddies, but tragedy would keep him from honoring that appointment. Now, to understand why fishermen are so prone to encounter bears along riparian zones, let's discuss some pertinent facts. The banks along bodies of water frequently grow thick with food sources like berries. Given that berries provide a key source of sugar for bears, it is logical and predictable that they would be found there.
A second detail is that bears and predators in general hunt along transition zones, like meadow edges and the banks of water bodies. The babble of creeks and the roar of rivers grant hungry predators distracting cover to ambush prey. After a few hours, Hooper's companions had noticed his absence. They decided they would find him just to touch base and make sure he was all right. Upon approaching the location where he was last known to be fishing, they discovered his mutilated body in the creek. It was clear to them that the only animal powerful enough to have inflicted such devastating injuries on their friend could only have been a bear. They immediately made their way out of the area to notify authorities and preserve their safety. Assistant Forest Superintendent Carl Larson organized a hunting party, and they searched the area for several days. He was accompanied by armed forest rangers and volunteers. On September 9th, the hunting party worked their way through brush and timber about a half-mile from where Hooper's body was found. Clark emerged into a clearing and paused to assess his surroundings and catch his breath. Unbeknownst to Clark, after killing Hooper, the black bear had either picked up the hunting party's scent or seen them as they made their way through the brush. It had circled behind Clark and was now closing in on him from behind. Clark was facing away from the direction the bear was approaching and had no idea of its location, intent, or presence. He may have heard a rustling in the brush or a few twigs snap, but something gave the bear away. Clark spun to see the bear heading directly toward him, eyes focused on him. At a distance of only 45 feet, Clark fired at the bear before it could close in on him and maul him to death like it had Lyndon Hooper. The bear's reign of terror had been brought to an end, harrowing as it was. Now aware that this bear had stalked Clark in a predatory manner, they set out to prove that it may have done the same to Hooper. The bear's carcass was opened up, and the contents of its stomach were sent for analysis at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Crime Lab in Regina. Soon the analysis was in, and it was confirmed the bear had consumed part of Lyndon Hooper. Human hair and pieces of clothing matching Hooper's confirmed the findings. As for the bear's motivations in killing and partially consuming Hooper and stalking Ranger Clark, a surprise encounter can be ruled out, given that Hooper was stationary while fishing, and Clark was standing when the bear approached him from behind. No animal carcasses were reported nearby, and cubs were not observed at either attack site. Speaking of cubs, our Cub Tier membership on Patreon, linked below, will give you ad-free early access to photos, notes, and episodes. And the $3 per month goes a long way in helping me continue to produce educational and entertaining content like this. Today, the province of Alberta is said to host approximately 39,000 black bears over its 255,541 square miles. This is a population density of one black bear for every 6.5 square miles, but it does not factor in the density of grizzly bears, which share the habitat. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Was Lyndon Hooper the victim of a territorial bear surprised by his presence, or was this an unusual case of predation? Given that the bear approached Ranger Clark from behind, do you think it stalked Hooper in the same manner? Ranger Clark did not have the scent of fish on him when the bear stalked him, and Hooper likely did. Do you think the bear approached Hooper due to the scent of fish, or solely out of predatory motives? I'm tending to lean toward predatory motives. I will gladly read and reply to your thoughts, so post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.